back. And we are ready to start. Our first presentation is by Kate and Chris. He's not here. And Joan, right? Joan. It's a video, and then Kate is going to talk. Thank you very much.
So I'll play Joan's video, and then I'll do some PowerPoints after that.
Hello everyone, my name is Joan Hua. I am with AVP. It's a data and digital asset management consultancy located in the United States. I'm here today to talk about a report we did with FAGI in the United States on software accessibility for open source digital preservation applications. We want to make digital preservation open source desktop applications more accessible. Now, how do we do that? To work on this, FAGI engaged AVP and launched a project, and we provided accessibility evaluations of select tools, and we wanted also to make broad recommendations that can be applicable to additional digital preservation tools and scenarios. AVP worked with Kate Murray on selecting the applications. We already knew that we wanted to follow through on the recommendations for an active, well-used application, so AVP and FAGI chose to evaluate Embark. And then two other applications were selected for evaluation. Those were BWF Meta Edit and Handbrake. Then AVP worked with Kate to develop the UX scenarios and that represent most common use cases for these applications. AVP brought in Tech for All, which is another consultancy focusing on accessibility, and they use the UX narrative as the basis for their accessibility testing, and they created detailed reports that compiled issues. The evaluation was done in accordance with WCAG 2.1, and as many of you may know, it stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG or WCAG, some of you may call that. They offer a set of success criteria that digital tools can follow and be measured against. And the guidelines are created primarily for web content, but they can be applicable or useful for looking at mobile applications and desktop applications also. AVP then prepared a recommendations report based on the findings from the testing. And in the report, we discussed more broader themes surfaced through the accessibility evaluations and provided generalizable guidelines that can be applied to improving accessibility of open source applications that support digital preservation efforts. That is a general outcome of the project. The other outcome is more specific, and that is to implement changes to improve Embark, making it more accessible. And I'll summarize some of the results from the analysis. They're maybe not too surprising. I'll give you the spoiler right away. All three applications exhibited serious usage barriers for people who are blind or have mobility impairment, and none of them conform to the standards overall. Some cases were so severe the applications were rendered unusable. All of them were difficult to use in general, and I'll note that Embark has many essential functions that were completely inaccessible due to a number of severe issues, and that makes it inaccessible to users who are blind or have mobility impairment. BWF Meta Edit was pretty similar, and Handbrake sounds a little less extreme, but it's considered difficult to use still. And now let's dig a bit deeper into the issues and their violations of WCAG 2.1 success criteria. These are the subcategory of issues that are sort of pointing to attention spots that are more problematic. And for example, you can see a concentration of issues related to a criteria 3.3.2 labels or instructions. Embark has 6 issues associated with it, and Handbrake has 9 issues associated with it. And let's keep in mind that the testing was done by following user journeys in the different versions of the 3 applications of Windows and Macs, using screen readers and keyboard navigation. It was not done by going through the WCAG success criteria as a checklist. And so that's why I don't want to focus too much on the conformance, because it's also important to look at the results based on the issues defined. If we just compare the issues across the three tools, we see that Embark has the greatest number of critical issues. And then on the other hand, Handbrake has no critical issues, but a number of high severity issues. In terms of global issues, Embark also exhibits the greatest number of global issues. Those are issues that come with a certain component, such as a data table or a pop-up dialog window. And so that means if there's an issue making a table not accessible, then that's going to be prevalent throughout the application, regardless of what you use it for or the paths you take in the application. And they also indicate problem spots to prioritize. These global issues do because of the high visibility and the wide impact it might have when you fixing the issues properly. And I'll give you two examples of the global issues in Embark. One was the keyboard focus, almost non-existent in Embark. And keyboard focus are those visual cues that indicate when the input is moving, when you tab on the keyboard on the screen. And sometimes it's like a color change or outline around the button. And then the other example is the tables cannot be navigated using a keyboard and the columns cannot be sorted using a keyboard. And that's important when you're relying on screen reader or you can't use a mouse or you don't want to use the mouse. Furthermore, the screen reader does not tell you which row or table or which row on a table is being selected or deselected. It's important to keep in mind that the issue count, which I'm showing here, only tells one story. The good news is that fixing something like a component can maybe address multiple issues, and that's why we wanted to look for some themes and compile the recommendations. Based on the results and the themes identified, AVP provided some recommended guidelines to consider for generally for open source GUI-based desktop applications, especially those that are widely used in the digital preservation community. And here I'll present a very quick, simplified summary. The report gives you more detail. The first one is what I already mentioned. Applications must create logical tab order or focus order so that the keyboard user can properly move around the application and complete tasks. And two, when a type of input, for example, a button, is represented only visually by a symbol or an image, an icon, explicitly add labels or instructions that can be accessible to screen readers. And third, color contrast affects readability, as many of you might know, but we also saw issues with dynamic changes that are not perceivable, as I mentioned, and because of the lack of color contrast or other indicators. So using a color alone, it's also worth thinking about that using colors alone to convey meaning is often confusing. It's usually better to combine colors with textures, textual labels, or icons. And the evaluation on Embark, Handbrake, and BWF meta-edit pointed to issues related to static text not being accessible by screen readers, so meaning the screen reader doesn't announce the text or it's announced inaccurately. And to address this, one way is it's a recommended practice to programmatically code the roles of interactive elements and make explicit relationships between the elements. So that's, for example, simply don't use div or span tags for things that have a role, like a button. And then there's the idea is that you want to allow assistive technology to access the interface and announce things accurately. The report provides a bit more detail, especially thinking about this for desktop application, and WCAG also provides more resources on techniques to meet this success criteria. And finally, consider digital preservation use cases and how the accessibility of the application can support that. A few things I'll point out here. I think out of the example of applications we looked at, there are a lot of usage of pop-out windows, and that's a that's common in digital preservation desktop applications. And those sometimes cause issues, especially when the windows are not announced by screen reader, or the keyboard can be trapped in a window and don't have a way to escape. And then a lot of these tools also use a lot of tables or data in grid form, and when that is inaccessible, that is a critical part of the application. And so it's important to make sure those can be navigated. Tables can be navigated using a keyboard, and you can sort and you can go back to the rows you were on previously. And then another thing to think about is desktop applications also used for digital preservation tasks often have a component of accessing the local environment. And then maybe perhaps in the case where the control may be handed over to the local machine, it's best to limit the custom interfaces and then make judicious design decisions to prioritize usability in the complex interactions. So far, much of the presentation, I focused on what the issues detected were and how to address them going forward. I suggest we always also consider the big picture for creating accessible applications, focusing on usability. And here are some high-level recommendations that I created, but the message here in general is, rather than focusing only on the guidelines and specifications and only on how to fix the violations, it's more valuable to consider how the products will be used and then make sure the usability is good. And now let's think about what we just heard. You might be thinking, it sounds really bad. There are a lot of issues and these tools are not accessible, but really it's maybe not too surprising. If the tool was not designed and developed with accessibility in mind, it often is not accessible. And that is the case for Embark. It wasn't designed or developed with accessibility as a primary goal or as a goal. And so the thing we want to do now is to fix it. And we do have the work in place and the work in progress so far that shows how important it is. And the good news is that many of the issues can be addressed, and there is a project plan already underway to work on them to improve these tools. This work is led by the Library of Congress in the United States and will hopefully serve as a useful foundation to help more in the community to think about and approach digital accessibility. And kind of to emphasize the sentiment expressed earlier, I want to end with this quote: "Accessibility goals are also usability goals. Good accessibility is good usability." So what's happening next? One of the goals, as I mentioned, of this project is to give input to the Embark development team to update Embark and improve its accessibility. So we'll give the evaluations to our colleagues working on Embark, who has contract funding to work on this in the next year or two. And the report should also be available to share, and you can view that. And Kate will tell you more about that next. And so I'll hand it over to Kate. Thank you. If you have questions, you can contact me, and my email address is shown on the slide here.
So Joan's not
Hello,
with us
everyone.
today.
My name is Joan Hua. I am with AVP.
She was so
It's
good. We
a
want to
data
hear it
and
again. So thank you, Joan. So now you will watch me struggle while I try to bring up my PowerPoint, and we'll see how that goes. Can someone who speaks Czech help me get to presenter view? So I'll start talking while that's coming up. So I'm Kate Murray from the Library of Congress in FAGI, and I'm just going to be following up on Joan's reports with a little bit of background about the project and some of our next steps. In the last session of the whole conference, I'll tell you what FAGI is, right? So, so FAGI stands for the U.S. Federal Agencies Digital Guidelines Initiative. We are 20 institutional members, all U.S. federal agencies, and mostly from the cultural heritage community. So the Library of Congress, the National Archives and Records Administration, the Smithsonian, we have some Smithsonian pals here today, National Library of Medicine, are typical participants, but also more technical and scientific agencies like NOAA and NASA, and even the FBI came to our last meeting, which is very exciting. I'm not sure I'm allowed to tell you that, but they came. So FADGI is led by the Library of Congress, but it's cooperative and a very collaborative group. While FADGI and all FADGI guidelines are, I'm skipping ahead here, all of our FADGI products have defined Creative Commons licenses and are always available free of charge. So last year at No Time to Wait, Charles Hosale and I talked about some other accessibility projects that FADGI had been working on, including a survey of accessibility implementations and a collection of definitions. But I'm here today to talk about researching accessibility in open source digital preservation applications. As you heard from Joan, FADGI is partnering with AVP, and that's Chris Lacinak and Joan Hua, to explore building out accessibility services to support GUI applications for users with visual impairment using Embark as a proof of concept. I'll talk more about Embark in a moment, but in summary, Embark stands for metadata embedded for archival content, and it's a free and open source application that enables users to audit metadata in DPX files as either individual files or a whole sequence, as well as RDD compliant MXF files. And in 2022, we added support for FFE1 and MXF. So this project with Joan and AVP has a number of components, including a literature review, an analysis of GUI software applications, with accessibility needs for visual impairment, and these include but are not limited to alternate text for images, responsive text size, color contrast, defined code structure for adaptive technology, multimodal cues for encoding structures, navigation, including scrolling, tables, and clear error messages. We have a blog post on the Signal that you can read for a little bit more information. We have published our final report on the FADGI site. I haven't really made any announcement about it yet, so this is the announcement about that, and we'll probably do another blog post about it. But I wanted to give you a little bit of background about some of the things in the report and the project overall. So why did we choose these specific applications to test? So our first criteria was that the applications be open source, free with a GUI, although we did test some CLIs, in active development, and used with and widely used based on download statistics. So to varying degrees, FADGI provides some support for both Embark and BWF MetaEdit. Of course, lots of other folks support BWF MetaEdit as well. So we reached out to the development teams of both projects to check in with them, and everybody was on board. And for both of these projects, FADGI has active development contracts which can be used to make the accessibility improvements. For Handbrake, we wanted to test something well known and open source on the video side. We honestly don't have a connection at Handbrake, but we'd be happy to pass along the detailed report if anyone wanted to provide some contact information. The criteria, as Joan mentioned, was based on WCAG, which stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and it's maintained and developed by W3C. And our work used the WCAG 2.1 standard. WCAG 2.2 was recently released, and there's also a WCAG 3 that's in draft form. So let's define some terms here. The first is the level of severity of impact on users. So critical means it's pretty much a deal breaker. The application component is basically unusable. And then we go down to high, which is somewhat unusable, but still somewhat usable, but still challenging. And then medium and low in decreasing areas of difficulty. Each of these communities of users has specific and sometimes overlapping needs. So for Embark, the focus is really on the visual aspects for people who are blind or with low vision. There are some impacts with people with mobility impairments in terms of navigation and clarity. Because Embark doesn't have any auditory or sound components, there's no impact there. But an interesting one for me was for folks with cognitive accessibility needs. We didn't get any feedback on this specifically, but it's likely rolled into some of the other suggestions, which will result in a better layout option and higher predictability. So Joan mentioned that Embark has a number of issues identified in the evaluation, and honestly, I'm not surprised. Right? To be candid, we did not have accessibility in mind, so it was not a driver in our design at all. But now we are aware, and now we will be aware as we move forward, and we're making the changes now. So I think that there's no shame in correcting course, and we'll take these lessons into the future. And we hope that other free open source projects will do the same, which is why we're sharing our journey. So let's take a look at some of these critical issues as an example. So the data tables, which are a common feature in many digital preservation applications, the issue is that the tables can't be navigated or sorted using a keyboard or screen reader. And that's defined in the parts of the WCAG, which is there from the, defined in the second column on the right, specifically about keyboard and focus order and visible focus. And the recommendation here is to ensure that tables and grids are navigable and sortable using a keyboard. Users should be able to traverse the tables in 2 dimensions and get header information when traversing between columns. And this is a global problem in the Embark application, meaning that all of these issues occur on either all the screens in the application or occur within all of the components with this type. This also means that if we fixed it in one place in the app, we can roll that change over to all of the places in the app that use data tables. Here's another example of a high-level issue, meaning that it's difficult but not impossible to use this feature. This one is focused on color contrast with a recommendation to make it at least a 4.5 to 1 ratio for text in a colored box. So to comply with a specific part of WCAG. The number 4.5 in the ratio refers to the relative luminance of the lighter color, and the 1 refers to the relative luminance of the darker color. In plain English, this means that there needs to be a better contrast or distinction between this background color over which the text is rendered. For both Embark and BWF MetaEdit, the specific accessibility issues that were identified will be tracked in their responsive GitHub issue trackers. Here's the one for Embark, which we've recently added, and the Embark team, which is Bert Lyons, Dan Fisher, and Caroline Shea, are working on these tasks already, and the community will be able to follow along with the progress on GitHub. The issues for BWF MetaEdit will be tracked in the same way. So before I wrap up, I just want to give a shout out to a project that Charles Hosale is leading for FADGI, which is to develop a high-level embedded metadata template for WebVTT files, which are used for captions and subtitles. This project was inspired by some FADGI guidelines for embedding metadata in DPX and BWF. The various members expressed a practical need for including data in WebVTTs because sometimes it can be hard to maintain the connection between the WebVTT and the media file. We're pretty far along with this project. I think Charles had a meeting this week when I wasn't there. But we'll share the product with the community, and if there's general agreement about the value, we'll approach W3C about adding it to the standard itself. In addition to the WebVTT work, we have a few other projects related to accessibility. The first is a new Library of Congress LCR, or Library of Congress regulation, which was just published on October 1st for digital accessibility standards, that sets standards for digital accessibility across the library and establishes responsibility for ensuring compliance with these standards and explains procedures for establishing exemptions to the standards. This software project that FADGI is working on directly supports this work. Another effort is the new accessibility content category on the Sustainability of Digital Formats website, which brings together our recent descriptions of formats that support accessibility, such as those for captions, time codes, subtitles, screen readers, and more. As an aside, on the format site, we are so pleased to have a contract for format descriptions, which we call FDDs. Research and writing this year with Myriad Consulting, especially Ashley Bluer, who is very well known to this community. And we've published a work plan on what formats are planned coming up for research in the coming months. So just want to show my appreciation to all the folks who worked on this project, our partners at AVP and the analysts at Tech for All, and also the application developers at both Embark and BWF MetaEdit, who graciously accepted the review and approached the requested changes with open hearts and minds. The overall mindset was that we want the applications to be available and usable to all. And of course, FADGI members, there are some in the audience again, as well as those in person, and all of our friends at FADGI. So that's it for us. If we have time for questions, you feel free to talk to me now, or always reach out to me through the FADGI site. Thanks.
Thank you very much. You 2 minutes. Is there any questions over someone from our audience online? Ah, yes.
I wonder if people in this community are really using Handbrake.
A couple of people in the back row.
Great. Thank you.
I mean, we just wanted to think about another we had to search around a little bit for another application to test so that we had a bit of a broader pool, so it wasn't just FADGI-supported applications.
Anyone? Another question? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kate. Our next presenter, she's going to join us online.
My name is Gentile, and I'm coming to talk with you today about community access to the open source, tools for community adoption of AV preservation software. Thanks for the opportunity to speak and all the other excellent talks at this conference. I've learned so much from previous No Time to Waits, and I'm excited to be part of this conversation. I come to you from the Museum of Modern Art, where I work in the conservation department. My work involves the preservation of time-based media in the museum's collection, the bulk of which is made up of material from the Department of Film. MoMA's film collecting started in the mid-1930s as a lending library, and it now holds over 30,000 titles in the collection. The film itself was stored in a custom-built off-site warehouse in Pennsylvania. The files that result from digital preservation of film projects and film scanning vendors, as well as new MoMA film acquisitions, grow the collection by scores of terabytes yearly. MoMA has a staff of over 800 professionals working to share its collection with the wider world. But I'm not here to talk about this institution, or any specific institution for that matter. I want to talk to you about independent artists helping themselves. We're all aware of a growing problem of how to store the films currently produced. It's hard to comprehend how much film has been made, but the closing of video stores and the rise of streaming services gave us visuals of just how much film is being produced. Perhaps it's not surprising then that when we learn that half of American films made before the middle of the last century are gone. This statistic only takes into account features made by major studios. So it's even more chilling for independent film. There's no record of how many documentaries, independent features, or shorts have been lost in the modern era. Film is infinitely more stable than its digital counterpart. At MoMA, we have film in storage from the late 19th century that's still viable. Digital filmmaking was a rarity in the 1990s, but took off in the early 2000s. It has worked to level the playing field for so many artists working in the medium, but the risks related to its storage are daunting to many filmmakers working today. In order to better understand this problem with a small subset of my community, I set out to do an informal survey of current filmmaking preservation practice. In a brief set of questions, I hope to see if there is the same level of anxiety that I have about preserving the work of these artists. Some of the results were expected, but some were surprising. Fundamentally, it was crucial to hear these artists in their own words talking about the challenges they face in preserving their artistic output. I also felt the disconnect between the AV preservation practices within an institutional context versus the support offered for working artists creating AV independently. One concerning result of the survey was that all but one respondent had lost material. Some had lost entire hard drives, while others had only lost the best master copy of their film. But it's important to note that these are not professional archivists. These are professional filmmakers, often stretched by budgets and time constraints, trying to preserve their work absent a formal body advising them on how to do so while keeping up with the next project. Additionally, the cost of storage, both local RAIDs and cloud backups, was a source of stress for the respondents. Cloud storage has become more affordable in recent years, but it still poses a challenge in organizing materials and managing accounts over time. And paying for storage of past projects year after year chips away at already limited budgets for new projects. Knowing what the future holds in terms of an ideal master file format is tricky for AV professionals. This is also true for most filmmakers surveyed. Because standards change, but filmmakers still need to be adept at maintaining high-quality viewing copies that are called upon at a moment's notice by collaborators and potential promoters. What is often the best preservation file format for deep storage becomes overshadowed by the file that's easiest to share. Almost none of the respondents mentioned using software tools to organize and prepare their files for storage, but many expressed interest in having a guide to do so. So what can we do as audiovisual preservation professionals to increase open source tool adoption and to ease the anxiety felt by these filmmakers about preserving their artistic output outside of institutions? This push for artists to retain control of their archives isn't happening in a vacuum. The archival community has been calling for extra institutional retention of artists' own material. In her ArtNet article, op-ed, published earlier this year, Lisa Darms, Executive Director of Hauser and Wirth Institute and former NYU archivist and curator of the Downtown Collection, calls for support for artists' archives community ownership alongside traditional models of institutional archives. To quote, "There should be archives in institutional collections and in community collections. There are so many exciting models for community-driven archives that keep control in the hands of creators. And people want the agency that comes with this sort of self-documentation," end quote. And this is happening in artists' archives like Asian Art Archives and Women's Studio Workshop, where artists have been empowered to retain their materials and build their own archives. To me, this resonates with the needs of the film community. Not all filmmakers will see their work reside in institutional collections. We need to empower these artists to preserve their own collections. While institutions are arcs, each film is its own unicorn. So this comes down to how can we get the message out to artists about how to preserve their own work? One way is to find filmmakers in your community is to see what they're reading and submit articles on preservation there. In the New York area, Mubi's Notebook, Filmmaker Magazine, and Film Comment are 3 such publications that have broad reach. But it might be better to go where filmmakers are gathering in their own communities in real life. For example, I was invited to speak at a recent meeting of the Brooklyn Film Collective. I had to show you the beautiful DCTV building, a former firehouse in Chinatown where these filmmakers meet to screen their docs, shorts, and features. This self-built community is one place where the education on film preservation can happen. But there are also more traditional educational venues where preservationists can share their expertise. In New York City, there is an abundance of graduate programs and community workshops where budding filmmakers are learning their craft. Why not form partnerships with these film programs to start them off on the right foot? But that sort of education must be approachable. It's not that filmmakers are incapable of becoming open source developers or adopting these tools, but they need introductions to the tools. They need to believe that these tools can save them time and be adaptable to their own workflows. Let's take, for example, the invaluable tool on extracting metadata from AV files, Media Info. This page is completely accessible to developers and archives professionals, but what about most filmmakers? What if we introduce these tools to filmmakers to make them more accessible? We can explain these tools better and show how they can be easily implemented to get the information they need to preserve film. I think one of the best ways to explain how metadata is useful is by pointing out that filmmakers already use it constantly when they are creating derivatives of their own work to share and screen. Making it clear that they don't need to open proprietary software to reveal this information to identify older files can help filmmakers manage their own collections. And while large institutions like MoMA and BFI, for example, have been using raw cooked to decrease their storage footprint of their film scans and make moving files easier and safer, few individual filmmakers know this tool's incredible value. A dialogue about its key features and a targeted introduction would go a long way towards tool adoption. While most current independent filmmakers aren't shooting on film, a lot of them have student work or shorts that use film. The knowledge of this tool for individual working filmmakers is rare, but the benefits in terms of storage cost reductions and file management have a great potential to help working artists. So many filmmakers are working with professional proprietary software suites like Adobe Cloud and Avid. It's helpful to remind filmmakers that they have access to a free tool that has a lot of file format options for editing sound files. Audacity is a tool that has an accessible website that encourages non-developers to download and use their tool. But filmmakers may still need to be reminded that it's freely available and relatively easy to use. And with video, it's great if filmmakers know that there are open source tools that can make older files accessible, even if they get error messages in proprietary software programs. Handbrake and VLC have saved me time and frustration many a time, and for free. And they're great tools to share with the community. The fact that both of these are free and open source tools and have a GUI helps to make them more approachable to the non-preservation community as well. And while the concept of an OAIS model for storage might be a little over the top for individuals trying to maintain their own archives of materials, talking about the benefits of packaging files for storage with file fixity can really help filmmakers sharing their work online and preserving it for the future. Showing filmmakers how a bag is structured and what its components are can go a long way towards the adoption of the tool for storage. If that seems all too time-consuming and heavy, just explaining checksums and talking with filmmakers about how to use checksums to verify file integrity is one way to ensure that they have the tools they need to create their own collections. As AV professionals who care about these filmmakers and their work, we can contribute our time and money to the cause. I want to echo the call from Peter's talk in No Time to Wait 3, Open Source and Long Term, that we must value free and open source software with the promotion and technical support of these tools. And also a big thanks to Derek's opening the open source during No Time to Wait 4 for how to emphasize open source tool users can and should be contributing to the open source community. Additionally, planning these conferences takes work, and you can be more active as a No Time to Wait conference volunteer. We can also contribute financially by attending No Time to Wait and paying the voluntary registration fee. And if our institutions have benefited from the tools, we can show our gratitude and support to the open source community by buying a raw cooked key, even as a tribute, if an annual supporter designation is not something you and your institution want to commit to. I want to thank Dr. Trevor Owens for his talk in 2021, Caring for Digital Collections in the Anthropocene, for bringing technological solutionism to my attention. The idea that we can preserve filmmakers' art without a human side is folly. And so much of this work is about maintenance, and not just of file formats, but of relationships. I am thinking of the excellent 2018 essay, Maintenance and Care by Sharon Mattern, that spells out how much of this work in the world, and in the greater world, is the opposite of technological solutions. We have to feel empowered to build those connections, to look beyond our profession and our institutions, to lend our expertise to the community and listen to the needs of professionals in our local communities. To that end, we can join up with community and local efforts to preserve media that may already exist near us. Even if we can't commit our time to these organizations, we can raise awareness of them. But we can also do the reverse. I mean, obviously I'm contradicting myself, but we need to bring these films and collections back to the wider international community to see the broad scope of the work already being done globally to preserve our AV heritage. And everyone here is already doing that by being part of No Time to Wait. In short, we need to act as guides and allies to the artist communities. We have to help creators help themselves. Not every film will become part of an institutional archives, but we do a lot at scale that's deeply important to the preservation of audiovisual heritage. Digital democratized filmmaking in a way that made independent filmmakers have to act like studios. Filmmakers need our skills to feel empowered to preserve their work for the future. We have the skills to share with our communities, and encouraging open source tool adoption is one way we can better fight the battle for indie filmmaking. My profound thanks to the following people who helped me build on this idea and share it with the community, and to the creative community for sharing their images through Creative Commons license. The end. Thank you.
We have time for one question. Anyone? Yes. I'm sorry.
Hi, thank you for this nice presentation. You were listing hash codes, and I was just wondering if you know about XX hash, because you're speaking about film, and it would be speedwise faster. No, we can hear her here. Sorry, we don't hear you on the speakers. Ah, okay, yeah, you muted.
No, I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah.
using the WhatsApp. Could you repeat the tool that you mentioned? I heard the original part of the question, but not the rest. Thank you.
Repeat the question. You mentioned, you listed hash codes, and I was wondering if you know XX hash as algorithm, because it's faster than the ones that you list, and you're speaking about film.
No, but thanks for the suggestion. Check it out. Awesome.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. That was very nice. Our final panel, so you're all welcome. Well, all the participants that are in the panel are welcome to join us in the stage. Should I say their names? No, they know who they are, right? Okay.
Hi, everybody, for our final roundtable. This roundtable was not clearly defined at the time we were writing our program, and it kind of came out of some discussions that were happening during the conference. But I really wanted to gather together a few voices on the stage to talk about the challenge of trying to learn in our community, trying to figure out like what resources to go to, who will support us, who helps, how we can help one another. I'll introduce our panel in just a moment. I just wanted to give a bit of background. I was remembering, like, I first became aware of preservation when I was in 8th grade. I saw an old movie from 1932 on television, and it had splices in it and a lot of damage. There were parts of the film that were just cut out and it was taped together. So I would see the video would jump and then the audio would jump later. And I don't know, from so much of like watching television and media, I was never aware of the physical materials behind them. So I had no idea what an archivist was, but I was like, there must be somebody who is taking care of the physical objects. From this fascination, I tried to start finding more films, and then I quickly realized so much film is lost. I remember going to the library and getting really into the cinema history section, which kind of presented the academia of cinema, but it was extremely rare to find any resources about the care of cinema. It just felt like I don't know who to talk to, everyone is so far away from this. At one point I remember my grandmother sort of acting like, basically I was saying I want to go to Hollywood and be a director, that it was like a naive statement to say I want to be work in preservation. You know, so it was a difficult, and like once I started to become aware of the programs, it's still such an intense decision when you're facing, I don't know, such important things about using multiple years of your life or intentionally stepping deep into debt to make a decision on how you will actually learn how to contribute to this group. There's still many other ways to gather knowledge. There's, you know, on-site experimentation. There's tons of professional organizations that will teach in a week or in a summer. There's active mentor programs, conferences, and it can be difficult at the beginning to become aware of where these are. I was also thinking of like, once I started realizing I should try to find a mentor, I was talking to one person who was just kind of like spilling all their information and agenda upon me, and then when I was talking to somebody else in the field, they were like, oh, that person doesn't know what they're talking about, and I was just like, at these early steps, I'm already just stepping into such dirty waters when I'm trying to like navigate, and I just want to learn. I don't want to be in the middle of a personal debate between two people in our community. So we're here to talk about the process, well, the challenge of trying to learn, to recount some stories, to give some advice, and to try to figure out how we can create environments that encourage learning in positive ways. So I'm going to combine my first question with a request for the introduction of my panel. I just wanted to ask us one by one to introduce ourselves and just to share a little bit about your experience, both on the side of being the student or the mentee, and then on the other side being the educator, the teacher, the mentor, the encourager. Start with Mary.
So my name is Marion Jaks. I work at the Austrian Mediathek. Should I start with my journey, since you told your journey? Like I'm a historian actually, and I always wanted to be an archivist. I wanted to preserve things, but the first thing was that I thought about documents. Then I ended up doing library study, and then I started at the Austrian Mediathek in a project where we set up our video digitization system. Like one thing that I remember is when I applied at the Austrian Mediathek, I actually applied for a cataloging job because I was trained to do that. I'm a librarian. And when I received the call that I got the job, they said, well, would you actually like to take part in a video digitization project? And I said, are you sure? Do you really mean me? I don't have any training in video. The answer was, you will learn. And that's what I did. So I started off knowing, being a consumer. This is now going too long, I guess. But that's my story of me studying it. And
I want to hear you as the student and you as the educator or trainer.
well, me as the student, I was very intimidated. That was me starting off, like feeling really insecure. And also being a person trained on the job. So this means you feel, you go to conference, yes, I'm doing video digitization, but you feel very insecure, yeah, about it. But we were a group of people, and we explored everything over a few years, and kind of switched the role of being mentor and mentee. Like, I was doing the analog digitization, and I was exploring that side. Peter, who was part of the team, was coming with all his programming and software experience. And third person was Herman Lewitz, who came from the film production background. And over time, with more experience, I knew more about analog video. So we kind of switched side at that. And one experience that I have now that I've been at the Mediatek like since 13 years now, so it's been some time, is that I feel it's always meeting people at conferences, and there's those talks and chats in between who are very helpful and are the least intimidating space to talk about things. And one thing I also want to mention is that for me, my whole journey in the video field was that I always used to be the one female person working with men. And on conferences, I always had the chance to meet some other female person who is doing similar things that I do. And I felt that always very encouraging. And now that I'm getting older, I experienced that it's much more women who approach me. And I think it has something to do with that it's less intimidating. So, yeah.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Somaya Langley. I work at the Science Museum Group in the UK. It's the first museum I've ever worked in, but I've worked in, I guess, the GLAM sector, mostly in libraries and archives, since early 2002, so what's nearly 21 years, on and off though. My background was studying composition, electroacoustic composition, instrumental composition, and I was always going to study music because I was, well, at least I thought I was really terrible at maths and science, and then arrived at, first year music school, and they said, here's this course on physics and psychoacoustics of sound, and then here's introduction to programming in fourth. So that kind of shows my age too. And all of this was beyond me. I'd grown up on an organic farm out in the country, didn't have a computer, couldn't work out how to turn a computer on. So I suspect that many of my undergrad experiences in the 90s, so this was in the mid-90s, were fairly negative. And what I was watching with myself and others was that, the discussion then was really just a gendered discussion. There was no mention, and possibly very little until recent years, of any kind of intersectionality. But just watching that gendered involvement with music technology, and, to be a cliche, the young men in the room would rush towards the instruments and press buttons on samplers and whatever. And the women would wait until everyone else had left and they could do that in private. And I think those kinds of experiences transfer over very well to the cultural sector and dealing with audiovisual stuff. And so I guess it turns out that sound art doesn't pay rent, or at least it definitely didn't for me. And I needed a job, and I was working with a technology company, applied for a job at the National Library of Australia, and when they were hiring, they wanted to build a national federated resource into Australian music, so pulling together all the different disparate metadata and providing access to content through a singular source. And that, I mean, it really was 20 odd years ago. But they didn't know who they needed to hire. So it's kind of an accident that I ended up there. What they needed was someone who knew about computers with a bit of interest in music. What they got was me, which was knowledge of music and a little bit of interest in computing and a little bit of skill and knowledge. And so I don't have any formal experience in any of this. And it's definitely, and when I first walked into digital preservation in 2005, there was no education in this space in Australia. There was no AV training. The people who'd learnt audiovisual preservation had done some kind of traineeship through national broadcasters like the Australian Broadcasting Commission, or the equivalent of the BBC in Australia. So it was definitely learning on the job, and I guess the most part of it was going home at night, learning something, and then coming back the next day because I had to teach someone else the thing that I'd never really actually learnt how to do, and I could just kind of fake my way through it. And that hasn't changed 20 years later. So I guess as the mentor, I probably mentor people more across the arts and culture than I have really in collecting institutions. And I think some of the things that I've said, which have actually, it's been good to watch people take that into account, was actually don't do what I did, don't say yes to everything, and don't burn yourself out to the point of collapse. And because I did, and it hasn't gone particularly well. So I don't know that I have many answers, but just watching people take a moment and choosing what they could sink themselves into, because we all do so much volunteer work, and there's always another thing and another thing. And we need it, but it's for a community that is all about long-term sustainability. Many of our jobs are not particularly sustainable, and so that needs to be built into kind of generational change. I think that's enough from me.
Thanks. So I'm Nick Krabbenhoeft. I'm the Assistant Director of Digital Preservation at the New York Public Library. I've also been teaching classes on digital preservation curation at the Pratt Institute for 7 years, I think, and at the NYU MIAP program now for 3 years. My journey into this space is I don't know if always had access to a computer, but I had more access to a computer than I think a lot of other people, especially my age. Came up through the worlds of, playing video games over LAN parties, things like that, and pirating anime, etc. That's where I first ran into MKV a long, long time ago. Came back into my life later. But life goes on. I try to get a degree in Islamic art history, realize, boy, I'm not smart enough for that. I'm not going to know the languages. I'm not going to know the art. I'm just interested. I'm an amateur. But I am the person in the room whenever I'm on a cultural heritage project that is most comfortable with the computers, most comfortable with dealing with data. So I go to library school thinking I'm going to do computery stuff with heritage, I guess, and discover there the world of digital preservation, take every computery class that they offered at the University of Michigan, and then went onwards to my career. All the while being a little bit confused as to what in the world was going on when I was learning all of those like computery classes at school, because none of them seemed to really connect to each other. A bunch of ideas about repositories or models or something, and you're like, okay, so does everybody run every tool all the time on every single thing that comes through the thing? Like, is there some magical big workflow and we're here shepherding things through the assembly line? And then I get into the real world and it's like, no, like this is not really what's happening. I guess, 4 or 5 years into working in the field, I get the opportunity to teach at Pratt, and I say, absolutely, I have to jump on that because I, at that point in time, was somewhat, I wanted to see some change in how these types of things were taught. I wanted to do it a little bit differently, so I was like, great, if you're going to pay me for it, this is a great marriage of interests, so let's go ahead and try to do this. And then that just exposed me to the fact that teaching is extremely hard, and there's learning what you know about what you do, and then there's learning how to teach other people about what you do, which is a completely different set of skills, and one that, you know, I constantly have to face my own not good enoughness at, my own frailty in that space. But yeah, I've been teaching for a little bit and hope to do a better job every year.
My name is David Pfluger. I'm here representing Memoriaf, and I also work for Kinemathek Lichtspiel in Bern. I also work for a company who does audiovisual installations, and I also do this on a freelance base. I studied chemistry, made a PhD in chemistry, and I never wanted this. So. No, I kind of stumbled into this field. When doing my PhD, I kind of realized I'd rather be an artist, making movies, earning a lot of money, maybe, but didn't turn out that way. I started doing animated films on Super 8 because I kind of learned that from my dad, and I was mostly fascinated. I was also projecting movies at an off-cinema, and then my fascination for science fiction films led me to want to see the first science fiction film ever made, and this, I was told, is Voyage dans la Lune by Méliès, and this was around the end of the 90s, and I had a very hard time to find a copy. I wouldn't even find one on VHS, and I ended up buying an old Blackhawk 16mm print online, and I remember watching this on my 16mm projector. I had the equipment from my affiliation with the Off Cinema, and this was kind of a total turning point for me, and maybe also a turning point for getting into film preservation, because that kind of comes with wanting to see old media. And from there, I kind of I then was lucky enough to get a job at a post-production company in Zurich, working with video, digital, and film at the time. So this on a technical side, I had no hurdles because I was coming from natural science as a background. But this was kind of an education for me, mostly in video, a bit in film, and because my interest was already on the film side and also in digital. And but the connection then to preservation was kind of me just going to conferences and festivals I'm interested in. But I would pay that myself, so there was a certain financial investment I had to make. I'm also a bit of a collector, so I started collecting books and stuff. And I think like many archives or some archives are founded in collections and then need to professionalize over time. That also happened to me personally. So I was at first very much acting from my gut feeling, that interests me, I want to do this, I want to have this, and then moving on to, okay, this needs to be more professional, and if I really want to establish my, get an income from that. And I have to say, today I'm over 50 and still not earning all my money from from preservation, so it's kind of still a hobby. And I didn't have the challenge with the technical side, that came relatively easily to me, also through my interest, but I had the challenge of the network side. So I had no network at all, but if you go to conferences long enough, people start to know you, you know, if you're good or not, if you know anything or not. No, but that was kind of the way. But there's an investment naturally in time, and also not to ignore an investment in money. So I'm rarely ever sent by any employer or anybody to go to conferences. And finally, that's conferences are a place where you make connections. And naturally also, I said I'm also representing Memoriaf. I only punctually work for Memoriaf on an hourly basis, but I'm not employed there. Memoriaf is an association which is in principle a self-help group of Swiss archives who at the point got together and said, okay, mostly mixed archives who do not know how to deal with photography, sound, video, and film, and they kind of got together and said, we have to make a Swiss-wide network where we educate each other. And I also, mostly by accident, could join one of these networks, and that was also crucial for my personal further networks and my further education, to be able then to pass on education to others via this institution. And now I teach more on a freelance base, but the fact that I've never been myself in an educational program maybe helps me to understand what certain hurdles are, and I always try to think back, okay, where was the point I understood something, and why did I understood it then? And then I try to reproduce that in my own teaching, and maybe not making this too long, but for me the hands-on aspect is very important. So we always, it took me so long to have a reel of nitrate film in my hands, you know, and oh, it's dangerous and it's precious. We need materials, videotapes and stuff which we can handle without any fear, which we can give out, okay, take it apart, rip it apart, look what's inside, how does it feel? Because still, I think, to me, preservation and the assessment of the condition of an element is very much, goes through the senses, goes through smell, vinegar syndrome, etc. It goes through how it feels in your hands. And younger generation, I'm still born in a world without digital media, but younger generations don't have this experience, so we need to give them the media to handle free of fear, to kind of achieve the experience which the older people could have in their everyday life.
So, I don't know, as you said, David, I think there's such a common thread of not asking for it, and for this, you know, the professional opportunities we had, because often we're stepping into these opportunities that we currently have, the backgrounds in cataloging or chemistry or video, anime, and having to go about discovering like what we need to learn. So I don't know, I was thinking a lot about like once you have that opportunity and you want to take some sincere efforts towards being a good archivist, being good in our positions, like we know that there's a huge gap between what we know and what we need to know, but I find it's not just easy enough. It's not as easy as just being like, oh, well, if I just take this one class, like all the blanks will be filled. So, I mean, I'll let you answer in the order in which you might want to share, but I'm interested in the process of gaining clarity on what we're supposed to learn and how we're supposed to get that knowledge.
For me, I really came from a practical experience. So it was, I did like digitization, and then I came across some problems, some errors. So I always had this starting point from the practical side. And then it was like there's two other areas, like reading in books, reading about video technical stuff, but that's already taking the first step. So you first start off being able to understand that kind of language. And the other thing was talking to people. And that actually needs a safe space. It reminds me of what you said initially, like asking people and you immediately get into some conflict or whatsoever. So it must be a space where you aren't judged for asking questions and for being insecure.
I have some questions that I wrote just kind of contemplating each of you individually. So I'll put this to one particular person, but others can feel free to jump in. I wanted to start with Nick. I assumed as a student of the program you were in, you considered it quite critically while you were there, and now you have a role as an educator in multiple institutions. So I was wondering if you could kind of compare the relationship between dealing with education on the student side to now being on the other side of the table and what you've brought across.
Yeah, so I think as a student, I was really frustrated with what seemed like a lack of connection between things, as I said. It was a scattershot. You do Droid one week, you do Jove the next week, there's Jove 2, like there's just acronyms being thrown at you. You're not quite sure why, how, any of these things really stick together. And half your class is spent installing things and doing all that. So when I got the opportunity to teach, I was like, oh, great, like now I can, try and make those connections. I can try and build a framework in my class that says, okay, here's how all these things stick together, and also bring in some of that practical experience, which is you have to choose which of these to use. You're not going to use all these things. You will use some of them. You will go meet people who have no idea what some of these tools are because they're in a slightly different space, and they think they understand what you do, but really they use completely different tools, and that's fine. Like, you need to figure out how to say, you make images, I make video files, we do some of the same stuff, but it turns out our tool set's completely different, and we need to be able to discuss about it. So I've tried to create that in my classes, but the other thing that I'm still kind of struggling with is, I think, and this was only 10, 15 years ago, you were kind of self-selecting to go into the digital sides in a library program a little bit ago, and nowadays it's just, you should be comfortable with it on some level. It's just part of our world that we're working with digital collections, and that means that there's a lot of people that have to take my class that honestly would prefer not to take my class, that would rather, just not have to deal with computers. And so trying to find, this goes in two directions, that trying to find a way to get them to feel comfortable in that class and to not exacerbate any frustrations that they've had with computers over time, that's been something that I've tried to focus on. I've also had to, look internally, because there are some people that are just, they are going to be in that class for 16 weeks and then they're going to be gone, and they don't really want to be there for 16 weeks. And you kind of know it. And there is a little bit of feedback from the student that's like, I don't want to be here. And you're like, I'm not going to change your mind. Like, that's just something that's going to be there. But hopefully, you can give them enough tastes of different things that they can get a sense when they're in a conversation of like, okay, I've heard about this and I can put it into a framework in which it makes sense. I hope so. But yeah, it's a little bit strange, because you trying to reach people that are like, I know I have to take this class, but I'm not interested. It is a little bit harder to do as an educator. But hopefully they're seeing the sense of like, well, I just want to catalog things, but I understand what that person in that other office is doing now, so we can have a conversation at the very least.
Maybe for teaching, one thing there is, you have to know the level of knowledge, or where the people you come from you teach come from. So it's very hard to kind of teach to a very incoherent group. If you know more about their backgrounds, you know roughly the gap between your level of knowledge and their level of knowledge, and then it makes it easier to kind of make the presentation in a way that they will understand it, basically. And I mean, one thing is maybe important when you're teaching. Teaching is not to show how much you know. Teaching is to try to communicate information. So I think, okay, there's a bit of a clash. The language should be according. So you shouldn't. You were talking about terms. You shouldn't deliver too many terms just to show off that you know them. On the other hand, there's naturally a clash. There's an interest to use a proper language. That's also part of the learning, that you learn to use language properly in the field to be able to later communicate with your peers. So there's a little bit a clash between using simple language and using the correct terms. So I think definition of terms and knowing what they mean is also an important part. And as I said, that you know what you want to deliver and who are you talking to in that moment.
You remind me of something. One thing to be very honest with your students about practical experience and getting out of that theoretical framework, and if they have questions, say like, this is what I'm facing at work. I think it grounds things much more directly than speaking from the paper or things like that. So that's another thing that I hope I'm bringing.
So in terms of that teaching experience, I guess mine has been more about knowledge transfer, and thank you for that session earlier. And I think where I've had the opportunity to learn from someone else, it's been to shadow someone. So I don't have a background in paper archives, so I've definitely learnt some archival principles through that process of going into the field to do the digital collecting, but many of these collections coming into libraries and archives or special collections in libraries are hybrid. So there's definitely that opportunity to learn from someone who has that paper knowledge and they can learn from you. So some of that, and teaching things like, I guess, the concepts and the principles rather than a particular tool. And when people do come to me and say, so I've done this course and now I know how to use whichever of the digital preservation systems, it's generally, a preservation system, not really the underlying processes. And so the next system or tool throws them. I mean, the Copter tool grid has nearly 600 tools in there. You can't teach all of those in 16 weeks. So just knowing, I guess, concepts and principles and the ability to read error reports, because it's like looking at a sound desk. If you show someone a sound desk, there's a million buttons. If you teach someone how the signal flows through there's a process, and you can find the problems. And I think that, that overwhelmedness that people feel about technology is not being given the tools themselves, that's probably not the right word, but to actually start to problem solve. I think we all do problem solving, but teaching someone how to problem solve and to look under the hood is, in my experience, not what people have at the moment, or we're losing that ability to look under the hood.
All right, I wanted to address the next question to Marion. For a lot of, some folks can delve into a 2-year program and adjust it so that education is their primary focus. But I think for a lot of us, most of the learning we are ever going to do is on the job. So I'm interested in this experience where they're like, oh, you're going to learn as you go, because I can imagine that be encompassing a lot of over-promising and putting a lot more responsibility on the person to pick up the pieces and learn than the supervisor. So I don't know, I was wondering what kind of, what you have found to make that experience sustainable, manageable, temporarily?
Well, to be honest, since I told you my start in video archiving, I think it didn't take long that I thought it was a very, very risky thing to employ me. Because we did not have much video knowledge at the Mediathek at the time. It was mainly audio. It was audio, and there was this video production team. So we really had to learn about what do we have in the archive, what formats do we have. We needed to buy the recorders because we didn't have them. We have a huge collection of consumer formats and a lot of variability. And our production team only knew Digibeta and Betacam-SB because that's how they produced. So, like, it didn't take long that I thought, okay, there's so much to learn. And the initial assumption was basically that I would need to press some buttons, like play and record. And that's actually not what it was. And that put a lot of responsibility on me because I saw all these glitches and whatever, and I needed to know what are they, can I prevent them? What is like a histogram, or what can I do with that? And I needed to learn how to make cables, to get all the connections and to change our whole video studio room, to change the direction from like having a Digibeta and making a VHS copy to having like all formats that we need and connect them to a computer. Yeah, the learning experience. It was on the way, and I still perceive myself as someone learning because I think in my job and maybe our jobs, we are learning constantly because it changes so quickly. Now I feel like, yeah, very confident with the analog videos that I experienced over the time I had. But since a few years I'm now in digital archiving, and that field is vast. And I think actually that's something that makes it very exciting and is, yeah, a reason to do that job, to keep you learning.
All right, so I have more questions prepared, but I certainly want to give a chance for the audience to ask some questions. I would love to encourage voices of people who haven't participated. Oh, the chat has? Okay. I'll pass this to my stage coordinator.
Hi, this is from our good friend Stephen McConaughey from the BFI, boosted by Sarah Gentile that we just heard, so that's why. This is a tough one, to be honest. So here we go. So question for the panel. Our work is difficult to square with the net zero aims, where there really is no time to wait. Any practical thoughts on this challenge?
Okay, I'll start this off. So at the Science Museum Group, we have a sustainability strategy and plan. I think we don't have a policy, or we have a policy but not a plan. And so by 2033, we need to be carbon net zero, including all supply chains. And as the digital preservation manager there, I know how much stuff we need to preserve, and I don't actually know how to solve all of this. Within the UK, I think a lot of stuff is passed downstream to the next supplier and the sub-supplier beyond that. So I think that's definitely a risk of just kicking the tin can down the road or making it someone else's problem. And I don't see that as a solution. I guess some of the simple things that I think Liz and I were talking about the other night, about working in community contexts where there is no budget for anything, so reusing legacy equipment. And we have a lot of computers and things in our collection that perhaps haven't, we've collected more of some things than we need to. And so one of the basic ideas is that we may well hold a lot of non-working objects, but maybe we don't actually need them all. And so one of those things is to be able to reuse equipment for preservation purposes, or to potentially pilfer them for parts. But that's a really simple thing. It just means someone doesn't have to come and drive to pick up a bunch of stuff and then take it away to be destroyed. But I think, and I guess the other point is, yes, lots of those, if you're in the cloud storage space, lots of those suppliers are doing big calculations and will give you reports on that. But there are a lot of problems too around noise pollution and impacting on lower socioeconomic communities when someone sticks a bunch of servers in a building somewhere. So I think the thing is we need to work together towards some of this, and if people do have other bits and pieces. So those are my tiny little things for now.
All right, so I'm going to be, push back on this, because I think this is an important skill for any professional in this field, is to determine when it's not your job. And according to my organization, it's not my job right now. And honestly, I can be concerned, I can think about good ideas, but we have a lot of other problems. We need to be more accessible. We need to think about how we deliver access in a faster way. We need to do all these things. And until my organization says, this is on the priority list, I'm giving myself stress for something that I'm not going to be able to affect change in. And so that's kind of, it's my job to remain, interested and listen at conferences and to understand what's going on and to be ready for an opportunity to discuss things. But yeah, I can't be an expert in all things. And until somebody kind of offers some benefit to me to be an expert in that thing, I just, you have to limit yourself in some way.
Any other question from
Just to say there's a little lag, so it'd be interesting to see if there's a feedback from Stephen, but I can just give it to you privately. That sounds a little rough, but you know what I mean.
Okay. There's certainly a lot of other questions I'd want to ask this group, but we have to move on to our last word soon, so I just want to pass the mic around and ask for some final comments. Whatever you'd like to share, but I'm particularly interested in what you found helps facilitate a effective, positive learning environment. I'll start here.
I think as there are still not enough opportunities of educational programs for this whole field, I think one important thing everybody can do is some kindness to newcomers. I don't see a lack here, but if I look back, I've rarely been kind of actively refused. But maybe the worst thing that happened to me is being ignored, maybe. But I think even if you have to explain something for the 100th time, or another student comes, maybe show a little kindness and explain it still, or give advice on where to go to look that up, or to go to another person. I think that's already a big deal.
I'm going to say, keep in mind that everybody's wrong, including yourself. You might be right on some things, but you're wrong on a lot of things, as is everybody else that you're talking to. And so be willing to, look at some of your heroes and say, oh, okay, yeah, they're wrong. That's fine. But then also go through the process of trying to figure out, well, why are they wrong? Is this just a gut reaction, or is there a deeper reason as to why I disagree with them from a technical point of view, ethical point of view? There's lots of points of view, but everybody's going to have different points of view, and you got to balance it through there and find out what really makes sense in your context.
I'm not going to say anything new apart from what you two both said, that I ended up doing some of this, particularly the more technical side of things, was to prove people wrong because they thought I couldn't do it. And while that might have been a good motivator for me, I don't think that that should be the default motivator. I think that care, you have no idea what's going on in someone else's life, whether it's a student or, you know, the people sitting next to me, that, you know, there are lots of big things that are probably coming down the line that we've got no idea of, and just that care and allowing people the space and finding ways, like, this is hugely privileged for me to be here, and I've paid my way to a lot of conferences, and I'm not this time. I'm paying my way home, but you know, that there are so many people that are never going to be able to get on that plane and find a way of being there. So making sure that those conversations are out there. And yes, there's no one right answer, so that, you know, yes, we're all wrong and things change, and yeah, that's enough.
So what I really find helpful is having the approach of I don't tell you how you should do it, but I can tell you how I do it. And another point is that often it's not this one recipe, because we work in an environment, we have different circumstances, different means, and I think it takes a lot of creativity to find the best way to do your job, and that means discussions, yeah, in a good place.
Wonderful. Well, I don't know, I really want to thank our panel. Let's please have some applause for them. So I think now is when the organizing committee comes to the stage, and we'll close down the conference with a few words.
PDF presentation.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Very quickly.
Oh, just a quick announcement here.
But I need that PDF on screen.
Okay. Jerome, can you get do you have it in the uploads folder?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Langley PDF.
So I can ramble well. We need well, Somaya will help you. So we're just going to have a quick announcement from Somaya, and then the organizing committee will have some last words, and then we'll generally it's been a tradition, I think, since the first No Time to Wait, that we do a group picture. So at the end of our final words, we'll ask everyone onto the stage and do a massive photo of the group of us, and then we'll be free for a wonderful night in Prague.
Oh, there we go. This is just a really quick bit of information. So many years ago, IASA was talking about the need for born digital guidelines. I got roped into doing some things and then stopped doing some things. And so it's been a number of years around, I guess, making a change for the way in which IASA develops guidelines. Previously, I guess, from this community, there was feedback that guideline development was happening behind closed doors, and there wasn't the transparency around it. And so over the last couple of years, I think, thanks to Toby Shea and Trey Burney as the previous IASA presidents, there's been quite a lot of organisational change happening. IASA now has a diversity, equity and inclusion committee. And so alongside that organisational change, which always takes time, there is now, I guess, the acceptance of community contributions to developing guidelines. And so there is a Google document there under that link. There is some information in there, and there is the desire to have some kind of collaborative notes towards guidelines for born digital video. We tried for quite a long time to work out what those topic areas would be, and in the end that was actually too hard. So we said, okay, we're going to put that out to the community, and we will decide as an international community whether you need it or not. And if no one puts the information in, then maybe you don't need that information. So I guess I just wanted to say thank you to Josh Ng at Archives New Zealand, Andy Martin at Damn Smart, who is also on the EASA board now, and Julia Miller at Paradisic at the Australian National University, who is on the EASA Technical Committee. The whole point of contributing is, I guess, you don't have to be a member of the EASA Technical Committee, which previously you did, and that anyone who is not a member of the EASA Technical Committee or the wider EASA committee, a wider EASA membership, can be involved. So, if you need information, Josh is behind the Born Digital Video Gmail account, and I would encourage people to start adding information. Comments are great on the side, but then someone has to respond to the comments, and you've just heard that I've got more of an audio background than a video background, so I'm not going to have all the knowledge that you need. And I'm going to trust that you take on a little bit for yourself, but also don't try and bite off more than you can chew, because we all know that burnout equation. So thank you.
Hi, thank you, Somaya. Yeah, that's it from us, from you, for this year's edition of No Time to Wait. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much for contributing. Thank you so much for being such a wonderful community. I think you could just like applaud yourself and all the speakers and the panelists and, you know, stage coordinators, note takers, the entire staff at NFA, particularly Adela Kudla. Thank you so much for accommodating us. I'm just gonna, hopefully I won't forget anybody. So thank you, Peter. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Margot. Thank you, Janneke. Thank you, Ida. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Jakub. Thank you, Liz, Somaya, Kevin, Joanna, Yvonne, Kaylin, Brianna, Erin, and Juja. And thank you, Gina, who's been doing the designs for our for the program since the very beginning, since the second one. So thank you so much, Gina, for always coming out with a new design and dedicating your time to us and the community, really. Thank you to our sponsors. Again, we couldn't do it without you. Thank you, Memoriaf, BFI, CNA, DPC, FIAF, Reto. I said Memoriaf. And I think this, FIAF, I said FIAF, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so thank you. And again, and I'll, Dave, some last words?
Yeah, so normally for the last couple of conferences, we had this part called Last Words, where we sort of open up to the audience. But I mean, really, we would want to hear some sort of reflection or comment. It's sort of the one part of the conference where we welcome comments rather than questions. But we'd love to hear any of your reflections of this event. I don't know, I think it's like always a big story for us, like meeting regularly throughout the year, trying to figure out how to fundraise, how to structure this. I think now that this is our 7th, it ends up, some of it is a bit easier because it's a lot of copying and pasting instructions to the stage coordinators and to the remote participation staff. So we have a bit of a structure, but there's certainly a lot more to build, and I don't know, we have a lot of work to put on another year, and we've been very grateful for all the encouragement and communication that you guys have shared with us. But yeah, I'd be happy to take any last comments from our beautiful audience here, if anyone does. Into the microphone, Radoslav.
Please publish all the presentation as PPT Higgs, because video is okay, but it can be published in the very famous site, how is it named? Presentation share or something like that. It's SlideShare, in the SlideShare. So please, this is also good addition to the YouTube. Thank you.
I am late for the No Time to Wait 6 presentations, but I will do also for them and for the 1 year late.
This is for a year.
Yeah, but it is on the media area website / No Time to Wait 7. So it is not yet, but it will be in a couple of days, weeks maybe.
Also, we'll send out an email soon just asking for feedback and sharing final information. But I mean, we had a Google Drive for all the speakers to upload. So the resources we've been sharing on screen, we do have them in a Google Drive that we could potentially share. If you go to the media area YouTube page, you'll see all of the streams that we did that were sort of in pieces separated by breaks. But everything that was happening in the room that we were streaming is on YouTube. So.
I think it was when Alessandra was speaking this morning that you mentioned losing some sponsors for No Time to Wait. So I was wondering if the organizing committee could send out some reminders leading up to the next No Time to Wait about sponsorship. I know I'm going to go back and speak to my colleagues to see what might be possible, and I'm sure there's other people in the room here who are looking to do the same, just so we ensure that we keep this amazing conference and network going. So yeah, if you could just kind of remind us and how we can help the organizing committee make No Time to Wait sustainable and keep happening.
Yeah, sure. This is a change you may have seen for this year. We had an optional registration this year. So, which meant that you don't have to pay your registration fee, but you can. So we had some conversations, and we may be moving forward with that as a every year situation. It's going to be on a sliding scale. It won't be very much, and it will always be optional. So I really I'm so tired that I cried a little bit when Sarah said like, oh, pay your optional registration fees, because I don't want to put you or her on the spot, but she paid her registration fees and she's online. So that was kind of impressive. It just shows like, okay, we believe in you and we want to keep this going. So you will see this this change probably implemented for the long run. We weren't sure, to be honest, if we wanted to do an optional registration, because we pride ourselves about providing this conference for free and easy access, but we have to remind ourselves culture is not free, even though it may be free in terms of, you know, getting free cinema tickets or accessing sites and web pages and cultural heritage, et cetera, but culture isn't free, and we have to also kind of stop that narrative. So we have to also value our work and your work, and there is a price tag attached to it, whether we see it or not. So we'll move forward with an optional registration fee, as I said, on sliding scales and really optional and very low.
I would often think so much about the presence of gatekeepers in communities when trying to learn and trying to build community. But so I was, also really motivated to have a free registration, just to make sure that it's not going to be $400 or $300 to be here. But I don't know. I was reflecting on this during the walk to dinner last night while in a conversation. That if we offered something that's like a sliding scale that includes free, but includes other positive numbers, that we could potentially support more travel grants and support more of the community to be here. This year we were able to have, nearly half of our budget went towards travel grants, which I think we feel terrific about, and so happy for the other sort of voices and people who can participate. So I don't know, it's been interesting to me to reflect on potentially having a fee to pay could help, further reduce gatekeeping by helping us support others in getting here. Because a lot of us, our employers are paying for us, but a lot of us are just paying for ourselves or needing assistance.
Thank you again for yet another year. I've been very fortunate enough to be able to attend like many times now. And so my question was, I'm just curious if you done any sort of analysis as to like the trajectory over the years, like in terms of like, how many people are attending, how many different countries or institutions are represented, how many people are participating online versus in person. I'm just really curious if you have a sense of that.
We have all the data, but we don't do statistics with that. I would say more generally it is half US, half Europe. So it is good that half of the attendees here, not really half, but not far, come from the US. Thank you. It is a long travel.
And one Mexican.
Well, and last year there was also some representatives from Latin America. So there was also this year 1 or 2 people from Africa. So it is more international now, but it is the first time. The countries, not a lot of France. It is curious. but a lot of Germany. No. There's one. There is a lot of French people, but not from the French institutions. Oh, okay. And the number, yeah, we are usually between 70 people and 130 maximum. After COVID, it was a bit low, so the time to restart and with everything. But usually it is 100, 130.
Just to add on to that, we've noticed, I mean, I've noticed new faces, so we're very happy about that we're not just like self-aggrandizing ourselves like, yay. But there's new faces here, a lot of young people, a lot of students, lots of postdocs, so that's really awesome, I believe. And also what I've noticed being on the organizing committee, there is definitely a need to kind of professionalize a little bit. Because it is getting bigger, like I can feel it, it's, yeah. So there is this like trajectory. We're going somewhere, and we need to be very mindful because otherwise we may otherwise burn ourselves out or just not create, or just not deliver what we want to deliver. So there is some reflection definitely to be done in that area. Thanks, Yvonne.
Just to add, curiously, we have more and more students who come. So it is not only professionals; it is students also. So. We have very different kind of people, yes.
I want to hear from Valeria. Will you say something about your experience with us?
Yes, hello. I've been, I think, in 4 years now part of the committee, but it's my first time being here in person as an attendee, as an organizer as well, and it's been a lovely experience. I've been noticing, like, from the online participation, how this is a community, and it has this feeling, like I'm now here and I can feel that, and I'm getting emotional as well. But yeah, it's very welcoming and sharing all the knowledge, and it's been so beautiful. And yeah, I want to invite everyone who wants to come, including people in the remote assistance. If you want to come, feel free. It's beautiful, and it's been so lovely being here. Yeah, thank you for all of you for being here and making a great conference.
Want to put Adela on the spot too?
Yes.
So for me, it's like this has been a terrific experience working with these people and being able to host you in the Národní filmový archiv. And what I'm especially thankful about, so this is my third No Time to Wait in attendance, and I always find it very inspirational, and also for the multitude of information and standards and everything, it is very helpful to hear it with your own ears, to see the people that are behind. So thank you for that. And that's actually kind of everyone's job here to share, I guess. This is my topic, I like it. Yeah, so thank you to the community and thank you to the committee. It's been a pleasure to be part of youth for 1 year.
There was another question.
Okay, now comes the fun part. One more question, sorry. One more question or no? Oh, can we move on to the funnest part? How fast can we get a picture? So if I can invite everybody to come on stage, and we need a volunteer to take the photo. Erwin, do you have your camera? Is Erwin here?
He's outside.
Putting him on the spot.
a quick housekeeping while you all make your way onto the stage. Especially for those of you who would like to see some actual film after all the digital screenings we've had here, there's a great performance at 8:30, a very special one, very intense one, 16mm and Super 8mm live film performance here at 8:30. The film or the performance is called Satan Amongst Us. And you can get tickets from us as the NFA Ponrepo staff. So in case you'd like to see some 70 minutes of a very intense experience of live film projection, do let us know. And now I'll pass the word back to Alessandra.
Thank you so much, Matej. I saw that poster. Is that hand-painted, hand-drawn specifically for this event? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very unique.
All right. Can you take the picture, please? Who has the best phone? I do not have the best phone. Anybody has like a really good phone? No, you need to be on it, Adela. Does anybody have a good phone? Just like an. Oh, there. On the purple one. Not the purple one. Yes, this one.